Hello again guys, so today what we're going to be doing is we can continue our discussion on paganism. Up until now, myself included, most sources of information on paganism have been dealt with in a very traditional academic method. That is, the information is presented to you almost like a chapter by chapter form, where you learn about a very specific subject matter in isolation to everything else, and then you can go on from there to learn about something else, and then something else, and something else. Now, of course, this is fine when it comes to mathematics, because, of course, 1 + 1 = 2. But when it comes to paganism, paganism is all about progressing and encouraging development of in-depth thought and individualistic viewpoints. And I find that to do so in such a prescribed format is very difficult to develop that in such a bit-by-bit way of progression. No, it's simply very difficult to do. And so I will be doing a few videos like this now, which will have this introduction. So obviously feel free to skip this intro if you've heard it before. But basically, I'm going to be doing some videos now where I basically just talk. I have a topic on hand and I talk about that topic, but if I diverse from it, if I go, well, yeah, over here and then over there and a little bit over here and there, then that doesn't matter. I'm not going to stop the video. I'm not going to rein myself in as I would do with a lot of my other pagan videos. Now, I know I waffle anyway and I do go off on the tangent, but trust me, that's me controlling myself. So these videos, they're going to feel like they're going all over the place, but it's a very organic way of learning. It's a way of learning where you see how my thoughts are all interlinked with the different subject matters within paganism and how the miscellaneous often comes in. And a lot of these videos will also be a lot of discussion, not hard presented facts, or presented in that way at least anyway. They're going to be me asking questions and almost then trying to answer them for myself. Please feel free to take part whilst I'm doing that. Formulate your own thoughts. Pause the video and go, well, what do I think? Before I then start formulating my own thoughts. Pause the video again when you've heard what I've begun to say and, develop your own thoughts again. Don't just take my word as a, fact, so to speak. Let me guide you by all means, but I'm not here to dictate to you or to preach to you, more to the point. I'm here simply to guide you and to share my own individual viewpoints and thoughts. So thanks for watching this, guys. The video is upcoming now, and I will see you in literally a few seconds. So we're going to begin this discussion today, guys, and it is going to be more of a discussion. As I say, feel free to pause this video at any point to develop your own thoughts concurrent to my own ones that I'm going to be sharing with you, or even developing with you if I bring up certain things which are just like, wow, I wonder what. But what we're going to try and focus on today and use as a basis of our discussion is the degree of separation between the physical and the spiritual. The degree of separation that forms a border, if you wish, between those two. The physical being, of course, the world that we live in and experience at this very moment in time. The realm of Midgard, if you're of Nordic persuasion. And the spiritual world being the world that is very much shared amongst all types of ancient European pagans, being that where the gods and the spirits live. Now, the spirit world is sometimes seen a little differently from different perspectives. For example, it can kind of exist on this realm, but also exist separately at the same time. We'll get down to the nitty-gritty of what it is and how it interacts as the video progresses. Now, I don't like the idea that there is a separation between spiritual and physical. I truly do not like this idea that there is a degree of separation. The reason as such is for myself is that there is no separation. All it is life, just in a separate, different, distinct form. Just like how water can be ice, liquid water, and water vapor, all, you know, on the same planet at the same time, it's the same concept. It's still water, no matter what form you find it in, but it acts differently, and you interact with it differently. And that is how I see the difference between the physical and the spiritual, and maybe different grades of physical and spiritual in between also, is that we are all simply just different forms of the same thing. I would call it life, but whatever you call it, it's whatever comes from the point of the source at the beginning, okay? It is the product of fate, or more importantly, more directly, the product of the aspect of Fehu behind fate. Fate, left alone, does nothing. It has no driving force without Fehu, the desire to fulfill actualities from potentialities. Now, I'm going to be referencing the runes most likely. I've got no script, obviously, but I will be referencing the runes and their effects on a grand scale, probably throughout this video and throughout most of my videos. So, guys, if you're not familiar with it, I have done, I think, 4 videos, I think, on the runes, looking at each of the ayats and the runes as a whole. Please watch those videos, and it will clear up where I'm going on what the references that I'm using regards to the runes, if you're unfamiliar with them. Okay. However, let's move on. So, at this point, as I say, for me, there is no difference between all forms of life, and that doesn't just exist on a spiritual to physical level, but it exists between the physical levels and the spiritual levels on their own planes, if you wish. That is to say that all life on Earth is simply just life. We share our life with the lives or the life forms on this planet. Whether you like it or not, we are all interlinked. The trees, for example, and the plants produce produce oxygen from carbon dioxide. We take the oxygen that they produce, use it to sustain ourselves, but then in return produce CO2, carbon dioxide, that then the plant lives then live off. And the links that link us all together, be it water, be it plants, be it the fact that, of consumption of other animals and stuff, they all are there. The links are there that link every single life form, in essence, together on this world. And they are the links that we see. The true link between us all is a quality called Hond, spelt O-N-D. Hond is literally life, in essence, or the spiritual essence that exists within this physical world. So we see a reference within ancient beliefs that spiritual essence exists within the physical realm in the form of Hond. Hond is something that you breathe in. It's connected to our breath being part almost of, essentially, of our pagan sense of self. In essence, the predecessor to the soul. Okay? Pagans, ancient pagans, do not believe in souls. We don't have them. Okay? We have something similar, but some very different and very much more complex, and that is a sense of self. I've done 1 video on that so far, and I've probably got another 2 to do to complete it all. But ultimately, the pagan sense of self is a combination or a way of describing and understanding yourself both on a spiritual and physical level, and how it all links together. Now, the important part of this sense of self is that we are both physical and spiritual in nature, but coexist physically and spiritually at the same time. There is no distinction, there is no barrier. Death, well, that causes some separation, some barriers to go up between our pagan senses of self, but ultimately, during life at least, there is a complete coexistence between the two. And there still is a relationship between the physical and the spiritual, even after death also. That's something that we can talk about later. At the moment, as I say, I'm talking about Hond. Hond is a spiritual energy, if you wish, that exists within the within the physical world that we exist in. Does it exist just purely in the physical, or does it actually exist in the spiritual? Well, I may have misled you, because you could, in essence, argue that it doesn't exist in the physical at all. It exists on the spiritual, but at a level where the barriers, the veil, if you wish, that exists between the spiritual and physical is so thin that that area of existence could be considered either or. It could be physical or it could be spiritual. And so both the physical and spiritual can interact with it in a very direct manner. And I suppose that's a fitting place to put, literally, life. The energy of life, Hond, within. Life is consistent both in the spiritual and the physical. And so that which sustains life, that should be within a perfect balance of both physical and spiritual existence, in essence. Now, when we breathe in, we do two things. We take in oxygen, which sustains our physical self. The physical self is just as important as the spiritual self, at least during life, because the physical self is still a part of our pagan soul, so to speak, as I say, our sense of self. It is what gives us the ability to experience the physical world around us. It what is allowing us to experience real physical events, to interpret the to interpret the information that occurs after that event, and to help integrate it into our consciousness, which is then a spiritual level of self. Our consciousness, our awareness is a spiritual part of ourselves. It is comprised of, you could in essence consider our consciousness to be comprised of the hugra, which is the mind, the thoughts that are essentially as our personality. Personality is much more than just thoughts, though, which we'll get into in a minute. But nonetheless, it's a major part of that. It's how we think and how we understand. Okay? Then we have our mini, which is our memory. Okay? Our memory is exactly that. I can't really go into more detail than simply saying our memory is the memory of past events, almost as lessons learnt that can then be drawn upon to help guide us on making more logical decisions, both in the present and the future. However, the mini, on a pagan sense of self, does go deeper than just your own individual memory. It is in fact the memory of your ancestors, a collective memory, if you wish, almost like a hive mind. Okay, because of course your ancestors will be shared with the ancestors of other people also, and so it becomes almost like a memory of the community. It is the mind of the pagan in its truest form. If we put all our minds together and the minds of all of our ancestors together, this would form the mini, the memory from which we can glean a lot of information and memories from past times that can aid our advancement in the present. Where knowledge has been lost, it can be regained through accessing the mini, the memory. Now, what's important is that, yes, this is a major source of information, but to some degree it is limited. Okay? The mini is the collective knowledge that all pagans have had over the millennia that we've existed. But there is more information and knowledge than that, obviously, out there to be gained and gleaned. And that is a spiritual knowledge. Okay? And we must gain it from a spiritual source. We obtain it using our higher consciousness and the link between our higher consciousness, which is in essence an aspect of the Hugra. And then we take it in, incorporate it into our base self, so our physical bodies, our literal base consciousness, our base aspect of our leak, our physical form, will then integrate that knowledge in such a way that then our true consciousness, which is the level of consciousness that we have here now, right now that I'm talking and you're listening, can then understand it. So information can be gleaned from either the mini or the spiritual. Okay, and there are arguments, perhaps best for another time when I've read up more on it and understand it to a greater degree. This is what I've been constantly kind of going into trancing over recently. I've been doing my spiritual journeys to try to understand where knowledge comes from. And I've been going about it in a roundabout way. I haven't been doing it directly, so to speak. But I have been asking questions and going on journeys specifically to try to obtain as to where does information or knowledge, if you wish, come from in the spiritual realms. And of course, the answer may in fact be Gununginap itself, the void that exists parallel but also outside of the spiritual realm. It is essentially almost like the third world. If you have the physical and the spiritual, you then have Gununginap, which is this additional, perhaps higher level of existence than both physical and spiritual in its own sense. Now, I don't like the terms higher and lower because it denotes then a hierarchy. We use this terminology because, one, we are modern men and women who have been influenced by modern culture. We live in a time where Abrahamic religions are the predominant religions, and a major concept of those religions is good and evil. Good being high, evil down here. Even if you just look on a physical sense, not just on a power level or whatever like this, the heavens are above and the hells are beneath us, below, into the earth itself. And so we have a higher and lower concept, and it's very hard to get that concept out of your head, because pagans, we don't really have that, or we shouldn't have it. We do have it, but we should not have it in our purest form, and when we have become a true pagan form of sense of self, so to speak. Because the pagan mind, it's evolving, it changes with time, and there's no problem with this. But the pure, traditional pagan mind has no concept of good or evil, has no concept of inequality either. This is why men and women are equal. Different, their things can be different, but they are completely 100% equal. And that equality doesn't just exist between members of our own community or our own species. It exists between all forms of things. So as human beings, we are no greater or lesser than the animals that live on this planet. Different, but no greater or lesser. Okay? Doesn't mean that we should not be able to, for our own survival, live off such animals. If we, need their meat to eat, to sustain our bodies, then the destruction of their life to sustain not only the lives of ourselves, but also our family and whoever partakes of eating the meat of that animal, then of course, that's not a bad thing. That is simply a balance between death and life. Death and life, or life and death, whatever way you want to put it, is just a natural goddamn existence. It's nothing. It's not evil. Death is not evil in any way whatsoever. It's feared by so many people, and it shouldn't be. It's just a natural process that occurs to everyone and everything. Even the gods themselves in pagan beliefs will die one day. Some will escape Ragnarok, but ultimately they can die. They can be killed, and without the sustenance of certain magic, so we say, they can also age if that magic is taken away from them. I'm not going to go into the story, but it can happen. So what I'm trying to say is that nothing, not even the stars themselves, lasts forever. And so to inflict death upon something in a creative way, so if you're destroying something to sustain your own life, if you're destroying an animal or a plant to sustain your own life, then this is not an evil or cruel or vindictive thing. It's something that's just simply a necessity. There is no good or evil. And this very much exists, this balance exists within paganism. Now, what I would say is with the modern new movements of like vegetarianism and veganism more specifically, obviously I understand why one would become a vegan, and I admire it in many respects, but at the same time, you cannot expect everyone to live as such. There are many different reasons, but what I'm trying to say as well, without going too deep into the discussion of veganism, but from a pagan perspective, you are destroying life. Whether it be animal or plant, you're still destroying life. Why have you decided that an animal is more important than a tree, or like a crop, or whatever why? Why are they more important? Why have you deemed that they are more important than that? Because in paganism, all life is equal. There is no inequality between the life forms, just a difference. That is all. Okay, and we ourselves are not higher or lower than that which surrounds us. One of the interesting aspects, actually, also is that animals are seen as almost being closer to the gods than we are. Not higher up than we are, or more important, or anything like that, those lines, but more attuned, so we say, to the spirit realm and thus the gods than we are. Certainly in Britannic paganism, the reason as such is that they have always been believed within Britannic paganism to be more attuned to certain qualities of the afterlife. For example, deers, horses. I've done this on the totemic animals of British paganism. Please watch the series if you want more details. But these kind of animals, ox as well, like all forms of cattle, they all have the ability to enter or to leave or to do both. To traverse between the afterlife and i.e. the spiritual world and the actual reality, the real world itself that we live within. They have this natural connection to the spiritual realms. It is believed, for example, that domesticated animals that we keep around us, like dogs and cats, have the capabilities of seeing our filgers, for example. And this is why they always get up and go to the window 5-10 minutes before we get back. Not because of their biological clock, but because our filger, on a spiritual level, always travels ahead of us and will arrive at our destination before we do in paganism. And so it's that they have seen our filger arrive, and so as a result are aware that we are en route and will be there soon. And that's why our pets are often there to greet us, fully in anticipation that we are there, even if we are off routine. We don't have a set routine of we start work at 9, end at 5. If there's no routine on life, our pets can still react in such a manner. And so we do have this filger also aspect, and the fact that animals seemingly can perceive and interact with that being there also. Excuse me, sorry. I've got a chest infection at the moment, so this may be hard. Okay, so I've lost myself a little bit there. We were talking a little bit about how, obviously, yes, the spiritual can exist on a physical level, and that how, yes, there is no hierarchy, no good or evil, no hierarchy between the spiritual, the physical, and all aspects of that. And that also applies between ourselves and the gods. Not many pagans will like hearing this because they will have been polluted, maybe not the best word, but they have been influenced by modern culture. There is no problem in having admiration, reverence for your gods. And of course, this existed in ancient times also. The gods were seen as being potentially superior beings to ourselves, amongst certain groups of pagans, at least anyway. But through the traditional pagans, yes, you would pray perhaps to a god, although that, praying to pagan gods is not a major thing. We don't tend to do it within traditional paganism. We don't pray to our gods. Only if we just don't tend to do it. We don't tend to pray to our gods. We commune with our gods through trance and through spiritual journeys, and we ask them to guide us for our spiritual knowledge and pursuit of spiritual knowledge, perhaps. And yes, sacrifices and that can be made to gods, even if it's just an affirmation of your commitment to them or whatever. But that's a choice to make on your level. But is there equality between the gods and people? At a traditional level, yes, there is no difference in all forms of life. And the gods are a product of life just as you and I are also. And so the difference between the gods and us, yes, they can do a lot more than us, but in theory, but when you look at it, we can achieve a lot too. And there is no real degree of inequality between us. So much so, when you look at pagan beliefs, for example, pagans have no true hell as such. We do have a place called hell, so I'm lying there, but what I mean is in the Christian sense of it, or the Abrahamic sense of that there is a hell where the devil exists and where mortals are punished for their lives if they have committed sin, evil, whatever. There is no purgatory. And the reason as such behind this is that the gods do not give a shit about us at that level. They are not there to punish us for in our spiritual forms, in our spiritual lives, for the rest of eternity, for the lives that we've had on this physical world. They're not there to do that. They're not judges. They're not here to judge us on how we live our lives in the physical realm, and they're not there to judge us on how we live our lives within the spiritual realm once we pass on. They are not interested. There is much less of a connection between the gods and ourselves, really, than I think people really realise in a traditional level. There is no real connection such as that. And the afterlife simply that we go to afterwards is, for most of us, going to be hell. Now, this is not a bad place, it's just the afterlife. That's it. And there are different levels of hell, yes, but to some degree there are worse places to be than others. But what's quite interesting is to get to those, not lower levels, but those worse areas within hell, is to die in the spiritual realm. Yes, that's right. When you die here, that's not the only time you can die. When you die in the material realm, yes, you go to the spiritual worlds. But when you live in the spiritual worlds, it is still possible to die again in spiritual form. And when you do so, the consequence of that is normally that you'll enter a sort of harder version of hell, if you wish. Now, there is an exception when it comes to interest in the souls or the consciousness, the awareness, the spiritual aspects of a human, for example, on a godly level. Gods only take, there are only two gods that really take any real degree of notice of mortals on this world. And they haven't done it for all eternity since they've been around. They've done it since ultimately they became fully aware of what Ragnarok was and the consequences of Ragnarok. And that is Odin and Freya. Now, this was, in essence, part of the Aesir-Vanir War. One of the conditions set for the peace between the Aesir and the Vanir was that not only would prisoners be exchanged or hostages taken between each one of them, not be taken as prisoners, but live basically. They would take two Vanir gods and they would live in the realm of the Aesir, i.e. Asgard, and they would take two Asgardians and they would live in Valheim in essence. This is one of the things that was decided between them. But one of the other things that was decided between them was that the souls of men who were seen as worthy, those who had died bravely in battle and had proven their skill at arms, would be taken, or were probably still at this point being taken prior to the Aesir-Vanir War by both Freya and Odin. They are both gods of death. Part of their aspects is the aspect of death. They showed an interest in mortal souls. And as I say, I believe it's to do with Ragnarok, obviously. But that the Freya would have first pick over the souls of men. She would take the first up to the first half of souls that was seen as worthy by her for her own army, if you wish, for her own purposes. And Odin would then choose from the rest of the souls up to, again, 50% of those that he saw worthy. But the first 50% would be taken by Freya. Now, obviously, these two gods have shown a direct interest in the human soul, or the spiritual aspect of the human that can ascend into either Asgard or Valheim, wherever. However, obviously their interest may, as I say, most likely the fact that it was integrated into their negotiations had occurred before this war. So it's been going on a long time. And that's why I'm hesitant to say that it's 100% to do with Ragnarok, because I believe that the gods, certainly Odin, didn't have his full wisdom at this point. He hadn't travelled around and sacrificed his right eye and hung himself for all that kind of stuff. And so his full awareness of Ragnarok wouldn't be at the same level as it was after those points. So there may be another reason as to why the souls of men, certain men and women, would be taken into these afterlives. Now, of course, they're not the only gods who have shown interest, obviously, in human souls. You've got Ran, also very specific conditions that you'd ever come across her, but there's Ran, the goddess who drowned men, in essence. And there's a couple of other circumstances where God may stake their claim upon you on death, but most of the time, most people are simply just left to do what they want in the spiritual realms, and for the most part it's pretty much the same as it is here in Midgard, just a nicer, better place in the sense that, well, you don't get illness and disease, you don't really get fatigue, or permanent death or anything along those lines. And that's one important thing, actually. As I say, you can die in the spiritual realm. The way I said it, it sounded a little unusual, a little bit shocking, even to pagans, that yes, you can die in the spiritual realm, and if you do, then depending on the circumstances, you can find yourself in a sort of worse level on the spiritual plane. But actually, we're very familiar with it, because of course in Valhalla, you die every day fighting your fellow brothers and sisters on behalf of Odin as part of your training. But Odin must obviously have some kind of control, because he's claimed your souls, obviously, that you will not go to hell, or an aspect of hell, for example, you remain within his halls of Valhalla. So there is obviously some way of controlling where spirits traverse to for the gods when you're on that level. However, regardless of this, as I say, there is, in theory, in ancient pagan beliefs, an equality between the gods and men and animals and all forms of life on earth and all forms of life in the spirit realms. That does not mean that we are all equally as powerful. It just means that we are all equal because we are all products of life. We are all life, just in different forms. Okay? Now, this video, as I say, was about the degree of separation between the spiritual and the physical. Obviously, I've gone off on a major tangent there, but you know, that's partly what these videos are about. It's about just letting your thoughts wander and letting them sort of discuss whatever that are related topics to what we're talking about. Because now that we've got a background on what the spiritual is and the physical and stuff like this, one of the most important things to consider is, as I said, that one, there is no degree of separation. We are the same because all life is equal. All life is different, so some is more powerful than others, but we are all still life. Okay. Now, how do we thus travel from the physical to the spiritual if we know that there are no hard barriers between ourselves and the spiritual realm? In essence, how do we astral project? How do we go on a spiritual journey? How do we trance? How do we do whatever? In many ways, when I first started, I like to visualize it in a couple of different ways. That the spiritual realm was at a different level of vibration to us, different level of energy, if you wish. And then as my mind progressed, it was more just simply that I was seeping back into water. And instead of sinking into the water, I became one with the water. I became water itself and just became a ripple. And that then allowed me to progress into the spiritual realm. Both these concepts have worked, and you know, some are more effective than others. These visualizations, if you wish, if not understandings of the differences between it. And I do keep that concept of falling back into water very much as a very good way of visualizing what's going on, because actually to enter the spiritual realm, you do not have to geographically go anywhere, and you don't have to raise your energy levels or anything like that as such. Theoretically, you could argue that you are changing your energy levels, but you're not. You're just changing your awareness, because you are simply going into a different part of yourself that currently exists. You're not creating a level of existence or altering your level of existence. You're altering your awareness of a level of existence that already is present. And that is the key to spiritual travel. And we get there by understanding the states of self. So we have our physical bodies, the leak. These allow us to have physical experience of the world around us, to feel pain, sensation, and they take that information and take it to our brain, which is organic, interprets that information and can make conclusions. But that brain is very much, or your heart and all these parts of us that we consider to be part of our soul or personality in a more modern sense, actually contain our spiritual senses of self that exist and are aware of the physical realm. So the hugra, the mini, and the modi. The mind, the mood, and the emotions. Okay? I don't know what I just said there. I'll just make sure I'll repeat it correctly. The mind, the mood, and the emotions. The hugra, the mini, which is, and your hugra, your mini, and your modi. Sorry, I'm losing track of where I am. Okay, your mind, your mood, and your emotions. No, your mood and your emotions are the same. Your mind, your memory, and your mood. There we go. I knew I was saying something wrong. So your mind, your mood, and your memory. It's a problem with working in two languages at the same time. Okay, so This is your conscious self, your spiritual conscious self. This is a spiritual part of you, literally. Your mind and your personality, which is a consequence of your thoughts, your memories, but more importantly, your emotions driving these things forwards to achieve certain things. Because bear in mind, if you have thought and understanding, i.e. your hugla, your mind, and you have access to memories, so that allow you to fully integrate and understand what's going on to you in relationship to past events, either for yourself or for your ancestral hive mind, if you wish, or collective memory, then you've got a complete and full understanding of what's going on around you. But without your emotions, there's no real drive or desire, there's no intention to go out and experience things. You will passively experience things as they happen around you, but you won't go out there and actually do things. This is your emotions. Your emotions are what drive you forwards to experience things. So the emotional part of you is useless without the rest of it to understand what's going on. But the bit that allows you to understand is useless without the emotions, because it simply will not have that drive to go forwards. So your emotions are very important. You hear a lot of time that, people say, well, what makes a human? Their emotions. It's true, emotions are very important, but it's the whole concept of yourself, your mind, your memory, and your emotions together. That's really what makes you human. That's what makes you you. Okay, you need all three aspects to be able to fully integrate yourself with whatever world you're in around you. Okay, and I say whatever world you're in because, of course, these three aspects of yourself, your consciousness, which we'll give them the collective term consciousness, your consciousness is spiritual. But as we're all aware, our spiritual consciousness is able to interpret and interact and have influences upon it from the physical world. For example, if we see something particularly distressing, okay, our consciousness takes it in and incorporates it in our memory. It becomes burnt in our memory if it's particularly disturbing. Our hugra is what first perceives it and understands just how horrific this thing is, that then, as I say, scars the memory. And then there is, of course, this emotional response to this whatever thing that is distressing us. And so we can see how all three aspects of our spiritual consciousness can have an interaction with something that is literally physical, something happening in the physical world. Whether it's happening to us or someone else doesn't really matter. There's still a response. And of course, that happens not just with the bad things, but the good things also, and all the things in between. Even the most minor of experiences that you barely register will have an influence on our spiritual consciousness. And this is what's important to understand, is that spiritual aspects of us can experience the physical world. That's amazing, because it thus proves that there is no division between the spiritual and the physical. All you've got to do is find a vehicle, essentially something to travel in, to experience it. And that the spiritual consciousness uses our physical bodies to experience the physical world. So when we come to experience the spiritual world, we must take this consciousness of ours that is spiritual in nature anyway, and simply allow it to travel the spiritual world in something that allows it to experience spiritual experiences. Now, the mind, in essence, does run freely throughout the spiritual world. It can travel and flow free, effortlessly and unhindered within the spiritual existence. But whether it can experience things in the spiritual world in such a way Probably not, because it's got no organs. Just like the physical body has organs to allow us to interpret the physical world, the consciousness, even though it is spiritual in nature and so can exist in the spiritual world, has no, organs, no fingers or whatever, no way of sensing it fully for itself. It can travel within it, but it cannot experience it. And so what it does is it has this spiritual body that exists that it can travel within, and this is what we do possess, and it's called the Hamya. Okay, the Hamya is essentially the spiritual, physical. I don't know if physical is the right term, but it's a spiritual body in which our consciousness exists in the spiritual realm, and the Hamya, believe it or not, is a part of our pagan self. It is a pagan part of our soul. In essence, it's the appearance of our soul, is the way to kind of consider it. It has our actual appearance. It looks just like us. And during our time in the physical world, whilst we exist fully within the physical world, it exists within our body seamlessly like a second skin. It is there, and it is experiencing, just like the consciousness does, the outside world to some extent. And with a powerful hugura can, your mind, can influence the shape of the ability of the Hamya. Can alter it, can alter its appearance, and can make it more of a presence within the physical world also. And so as you age, as you get older, and thus weaker physically, as you become more frail, as you become more prone to illness, for example, the Hamya, with someone who's got a potentially strong hugura, the Hamya can actually start taking over parts of the processes that the physical body is failing within. It can strengthen the body and keep it as if it was, in its prime, in its 30s, for example, and keep it strong and well and resistant. And it can also enhance. So, for example, I do a lot of sports, a lot of weightlifting, a lot of fighting, things like this. And my Hamya is something that I have learnt to use within my weightlifting exclusively. I haven't used it in other things yet because there's more distractions with those things. But with my weightlifting, I found almost a meditative level in which I'm able to lift in. And I use my enhanced Hamya to give me or bestow upon me a greater degree of strength and endurance. And in time, I hope to be able to use this within things like my MMA and stuff like this also, to let the Hamya enhance my body, despite obviously a lot more going on, a lot more unpredictable things, such as fighting an opponent. You can't predict what they're going to do. When I'm weightlifting, all I've got is a bar of weight. Don't really have to worry about what that's going to do. I know what it's going to do. It's going to do whatever I do to it. Okay, and so there's a lot more going on. But being able to apply it where there are more variables, that is the ultimate key goal that I'm working on and developing at the moment and using to enhance myself. However, this Hamya, as I say, does exist within the physical body, can influence the physical world, but it is ultimately the vessel in which the consciousness travels within on the spiritual level. It is when we do go into a trance and spiritual journeys, it is within the Hamya that we find ourselves travelling. The Hamya within the spiritual world can change shape just like it can in the physical world. In fact, it can be very much more malleable in the spiritual world than it can be in the physical sense. Or it's certainly easier to change. It's easier to be manipulated, and it will often take the form of an animal as well as your human form. You can take on the form of your animal companion, also your filja, and you can turn into other things as well. You're not just limited to the aspect of your filja, but of course the degree of transformation depends upon your degree of awareness and your power of your mind, for example. Anyway, this spiritual body is what allows your consciousness to travel and experience the spiritual world on a spiritual level. And so the Hamya is important because not only does it have potential uses in the physical world, It can be used in shamanic healing, for example, and things like this. But it can also be used, it's predominantly and primarily used to travel and experience the spiritual realm, and so thus acquire spiritual knowledge for spiritual journeys. You can enhance your spiritual knowledge before you die, basically, before you become fully bound to the spirit world, so to speak. You can gain and glean a lot of spiritual knowledge while still in this physical body. And so to do this, to enter your Hamya, to enter the spiritual world and to travel freely and fully, to have a full experience. Most of the time people, it'll be almost like a dream, but to fully exist in it and feel like you exist in it to the same degree that you are existing in the physical world, fully awake, fully aware, fully conscious, fully in control. This is the important bit. What you must do is your consciousness at the moment will be very much inclined towards the physical. I've described it as an equilibrium before, where the equilibrium in the physical world, in fact the majority of our lives, is heavily balanced over towards the physical side. So much so that most people aren't even aware that spiritual exists. But there is a free flow of movement of energy between this equilibrium. And so all you must do is shift the equilibrium enough over here towards the spiritual side so that you become more spiritual than you do physical. And at that point, you essentially are falling back with your consciousness, so to speak, from your physical body into your spiritual body, your Hamya. You're not physically moving, you're not physically moving back, you're not spiritually moving or falling back, but it's a good way of visualizing it, where you are just seeping into your consciousness fully and becoming aware of your consciousness on a spiritual level rather than a physical level. And at that point, you have travelled between the physical and the spiritual. And from there on in, it's quite easy to move around between the different aspects of the spiritual world. It's as easy as walking around or jumping up and, getting in your car and all the rest of it. It's as easy as that. Okay? Now, doing that is not as easy as it sounds. It does take experience. And as your state of yada, your state of awareness, rises up, as you gain a higher awareness to your consciousness, your balance in your equilibrium will be permanently shifted over here, okay, towards the spiritual level, where to the point where when you're in your physical level, you're consciously aware that there is a spiritual side to everything. You're constantly aware of your spiritual existence. You can feel a constant connection to the spiritual worlds. And you can push it so far where you are almost concurrently living both in the spiritual and the physical at the same time. Now, you can't shift it over here permanently. Well, you can, but we'll get into what that is in a minute. But you will always obviously possess that physical anchor or that tether during life. Now, what happens if you take the spiritual balance and shift it over here whilst you still have a physical body? Well, we've done this. It's spiritual travel. Okay? But what if you permanently keep it over here? Okay? What if you never allow it to come back more over here so that you re-enter your body? Well, there are accounts that exist describing what these kind of individuals are like. One, they're very powerful shamans to start off with. They're incredibly experienced with spiritual travel. So getting to this point is not easy. It takes a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, a lot of spiritual awareness, and and everything like this. Okay, it's not something everyone can do or will ever be able to do. Only the most powerful of shamans are normally capable of it. What they do at this point is then they will become permanently bound. Not permanently, they can shift it back, but they obviously willingly make it permanently bound to their spiritual hamya rather than their leek, their body. Now, they keep some anchor to their body. They have to. okay? Because the body is what fuels their spirit and allows the spirit to exist both on the spiritual realm, but in their case, their Hamya, they have found a way to make their Hamya exist on the physical realm also, which of course it does. The Hamya is and does exist on the physical world. It exists within our body, as I say, as a second skin, but it can't disjoint itself too far from the physical body. It's kind of bound to the human body in many respects. It can change its shape, it can make you more animalistic, like the berserkers, so on and so forth. You can shapeshift as a result in ancient beliefs, but it never can leave your body as such in the physical realm, apart from when you're a very, very powerful shaman. We do see this with Seder practitioners. They do send off, they can send the Hamya forwards to, you know, to in the physical world, so it is known to be so. But normally what they do is they normally use their filja to travel the physical world. They've managed to make their filja capable of travelling in the physical realm as well as the spiritual. And in essence, to be honest, even with these cases, it's not like when you read the sagas and the Eddas, it's not even like it's certain it's happening in the physical world. It might be just that their Hamya or their filja are travelling to interact with the Hamya and the filja of whoever they're interacting with on the spiritual level, which then has implications on the physical level. I don't think there's a direct physical influence with these people. But with the shamans that have made it so that their Hamya, in essence, their spiritual form exists at the physical level as well as the spiritual level, that they can exist within the physical realm as a spirit while still alive, these individuals are incredibly potent in their capabilities and their knowledge. Okay, so it can be done, but it's difficult, is what I'm trying to say. And it's possible that Seder practitioners can do it also, but again, they would have to be of an equal power level. Okay, and it would probably be easier just to interact with someone else on the spiritual level without having to force your spirit into the physical level. Okay. Now, these shamans that can exist in the physical realm as spirits, as I say, do require their bodies for sustaining their spirits. If their bodies were to go, in essence, to die, then their spirit needs sustenance from elsewhere. Okay? And as their bodies begin to die, again, they can extend their own life of the physical body by interacting in a certain way on the physical realm, which we'll get into now. Now, these people, these shamans, are sometimes called spiritual vampires or leeches. Okay, so vampires is a much more common term. Sometimes you'll hear them as spiritual leeches, and they have a presence about them. Sometimes you walk in a room, for example, and you feel an oppressive force around you. Sometimes you meet someone and they have an oppressive force about them where they feel like they're just draining all the emotion out of the room, that they are draining your literal soul, making you feel tired, making you feel depressed, lethargic, whatever. These are examples potentially of what are spiritual leeches. So these shamans, when they do return to their bodies, if they do, certainly in the earlier stages, would still have this leeching process going on. Not because it's just there permanently, it's not a passive ability as such, but it's because they have learned that by draining the spirit or the hond of those around them, the living creatures around them, including people, then they are able to sustain their bodies. Because hond, remember, is the air, the oxygen of the spirit. Just like oxygen is the oxygen of the body, hond sustains the body, the spirit, just like a spiritual form of oxygen. Well, the hond also, it nurtures the physical also. It has a dual aspect. It nurtures the spiritual as well as the physical. Okay, both are sustained by hond. Without hond, you die. It's as simple as that. And they find that they are able to absorb the hond or take away the hond from those around them, in essence, the spiritual self. They are able to sustain their bodies thus for longer and live much beyond their natural lifespan by doing so. Now, all things must die, and of course it will reach a point where their bodies do essentially turn into corpses, and eventually even stone and dust, depending on how old they are. Now, there still is a physical presence. When a pagan dies, for example, we still have a physical presence. Our bodies do not stop being our bodies. They are still our leak, our physical manifestations of ourself. And upon death, obviously our consciousness leaves, but an aspect of our consciousness stays, called the Vard, which has our memories and our thoughts to a degree, but it's lacking our emotions. So as I say before, it has no drive, it stays with our body, it has no reason to experience the world, but is there, present in our body, and can manifest itself physically fully within our bodies, and form what's called a Draugr at that point, which is essentially a zombie, but not a zombie, but for all considerations is a zombie. Okay, and the Vard will be there with the body for all of eternity. Even when it is ash and dust and spread, it will still attach itself to some degree to the physical remnants of the body, that is, whatever is there. Okay, and the Vard contains, as I say, your memory and your thoughts, so it can think and act like you, and it can remember everything that you have done in your life. And so this is something that a necromancer would interact with. A necromancer would be able to, when they commune with a spirit, they don't commune with you, your consciousness within the spiritual realm, they commune with your Vard instead. Your Vard is what's wanted, because the Vard is easy to communicate with, and at the same time, it can't lie. It has no emotions, so it simply has your knowledge and your thoughts. It will tell you the truth pretty much every time. It can try to avoid answers. It can try and not try and talk to you if it doesn't want to, but ultimately, if you force it to answer, it will answer truthfully. So a Vard is very useful to a necromancer, for example. Now, there are other ways to commune with the dead, to commune with the actual person itself who has passed on, the consciousness, what we would regard as the individual, their mind, the memory and the mood, that combined essence within the field, sort of within the hamia of that individual, can be communed with, but that would require essentially the rite of the high seat, I think it's called. It's a Seder practice. And ultimately you travel to Helheim, or you travel to wherever the spirit is. You travel to the spirit realms and commune directly with the spirit itself. A lot harder, a lot more difficult, a lot more arduous than simply talking to the Vard of the individual, but a lot less messy because you don't need a corpse. Okay, so that's about communion with the dead. Okay, and how the spirit kind of still interacts during death. I don't know how we got onto that topic, but basically, as I was saying before, when it comes to spiritual travel, you must simply, as I say, kind of go into your own consciousness and shift the balance towards the spiritual. And as I say, there are those who have done it so much so that they are able to exist on a spiritual level, even on a permanent basis, even if they still have a physical body that's still living. And as I say, these are the spiritual vampires, if you wish, or the leeches. And I would more likely call them a wraith, okay? They are more like wraiths than anything else. And it's possible wraiths are still around, shamans that have existed since whenever they existed, 2,000, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years ago, or more recently. And there may be people who are practiced enough to be able to do it in modern day. Yeah, I've certainly felt their presence before. So I would definitely say that wraiths, as I call them, do exist. And now you know what that feeling is. Most likely a wraith, or spiritual leech or vampire, an ancient shaman essentially, draining you of your life energies to sustain themselves, because the point happens when their bodies become so old that they do die and they do lose their physical anchor with the world in essence. They keep their physical anchor in the sense that it's still there, but it's rotten and it's turned to dust or whatever, that body can no longer sustain them. The body was sustaining their spirit. Okay, and when they consumed Hond off other people, they were sustaining their body as well as their spirit, but mostly their body, and their body in return was sustaining their spirit. When their body goes, it is lifeless. It no longer contains Hond, and you cannot give it any more Hond or any more life. Okay, it is dead, and that is it. And so the spirit is then disjointed. Okay. Now, they do not wish to travel to the spiritual realms and live a typical spiritual existence. They obviously have undergone this practice so that they can live and continue to exist on the physical realm. And so what they do is they have no choice in the matter now. They must consume energy, life energy, to be able to sustain their spiritual existence within this physical realm. If they don't, then they will lose contact with the physical realm and will find themselves passing fully into the spiritual realm with no real way of returning, not without perhaps the aid of a necromancer or something along these lines, or without finding one of the paths, such as the Bifrost, for example. But then again, they would only be able to temporarily live here without re-establishing that leech kind of existence that they had before. And this really gets me then on to how the gods come and visit this planet, the Midgard, the realm of the physical. Okay, gods and other spiritual beings, giants, elves, whatever, all that kind of thing, right? They are all spiritual in nature. They have never, in their entire existence, had a physical body. So experiencing the physical world for them is not like experiencing the spiritual world for us. We have both spiritual and physical nature, okay? The only one who had that within them, in the gods, was Ymir himself, okay? And we are of Ymir, hence why we have this dual aspect of spiritual and physical nature to us. And why everything in this Midgard reality has that dual aspect to themselves, because we are all the children of Ymir, in essence, okay? But the gods and the spirits, they do not have that. Now, there's no denying that the gods, for example, haven't visited Midgard. They haven't existed here for at least a short period of time at a time. But without a physical body, with the spiritual leeches, for example, it becomes difficult for them to exist here for a long time. The Bifrost is one way, and there's a gate also between Hell and Midgard also that allows travel from Hell to the physical realm also. And bear in mind, there is no geographical distance to travel. It's just like almost like a hole within the barrier that must seep spiritual energy into this world, so that the spiritual beings that come across those bridges, if you wish, can exist nearby those bridges for an indefinite period of time without finding themselves seeping back into the spiritual world. However, it is important that, of course, the gods are known to have travelled throughout Midgard, so they must be able to travel away from these bridges, these gaps within the barriers of spiritual and the physical. The manner in which they do, I am uncertain. There's a few ways that I know that they can do it, but the manner in which they can do it without that, I don't know if it can be done or not. Now, there is one particular subgroup of gods or godlike beings, more godlike beings, that can do this, and I'll get into that in a minute. But the gods themselves and the spirits do exist at the end of the day within this world. Okay, they may be Vards, they may be spiritual leeches, they may be those sub-race, as I say, of godlike beings, most likely that, or they could be actual, spirits, land spirits, if you wish, that have somehow managed to stay in this world. Now, one way is that the spiritual aspects, like gods and spirits and stuff and giants, can exist on this world as long as they exist, or can exist for a period of time in this world in a physical sense, as long as they are present within, ultimately I suppose you call them the ley lines, but areas of high spiritual activity, where the barriers between the spiritual realms and the physical realms are so non-existent, that, or so close that they are considered to be non-existent. The equilibrium is kind of bang in the middle, and both spirit and physical exist at the same time. Now, this may not always be there. That the realms seem to have a sort of almost movement about them, an orbit around one another. And even though they are not physically separate, they do, from time to time, their energy levels seem to, as I say, shift the equilibrium more one way or another, and that then allows the spiritual being to exist in the physical realm for the period of time in which those barriers are down, in essence. But how do the gods travel? We know that Odin's been on a lot of travels. It's possible that by going through the Bifrost, for example, it's called the Rainbow Bridge. It could be that it is a form of dispersion, a prism if you wish, and that it disperses the aspect of the god from a very high kind of spiritual being, in the sense that it's full of spiritual energy, into much lesser spiritual beings that require less energy to be sustained in the physical realm, and so can exist in the physical world for a reasonable period of time, perhaps doing the same thing that a spiritual leech would do, living off the hand of other beings. Could not just humans, could be trees, could be literally the world itself, you know. And it's possible at that point that what we see when the gods are travelling in such a way that, because they have been split down to much smaller energy forms, that this is how we get like the Britannic gods. The Britannic gods are actually very different, even though pagan, they are very different to the gods of the Norse, for example, and the Germanic tribes. The Britannic pagans don't really believe in a transcendency of gods in any way whatsoever. They don't believe as such as gods existing permanently in the spiritual realm. For them, the spiritual and the physical are literally the same thing, much as how I've been going on, but to a much greater degree, where spirits can live in the physical realm, and we live and can visit the spiritual realm in our physical forms if needs be. It doesn't need to be a spiritual travel. The barriers are much more diffuse within British paganism. And it's possible that the reason for this is that when the gods, if they travel down the Bifrost, they become different aspects of themselves. They get cut up into little bits, so to speak. And so Odin, for example, could be the root of Kurnos, the hunter god. He could also be the green god, for example. He could also be other gods within Britannic or, you know, ancient pagan belief systems, for example. The Freya, for example, could form multiple aspects of the female goddesses also. And so that's one way. It's one of my ideas that I've had about why the Britannic gods are very, very, very imminent, and why all the other Germanic gods are very, not connected. They do visit, but they only visit. Whereas the Britannic gods, they live amongst us, and could be one reason. The other reason is that, of course, there are two separate types of gods. Now, before we go into that, the only other way that I know that a god of the Nordic and Germanic persuasion can exist on this world on a pretty much permanent basis is through possession. They can possess a winning tribute. Odin often would possess his berserkers, for example, and he could travel within the body of that berserker and use their body as his own body, as his own tether to the physical world, in essence. And could travel, and it's obviously being, a god and having an immense hugla, he could easily influence the Hamya of the berserker to change the outward appearance so that it would appear as Odin and not as the berserker if he wanted, or he could still travel the world as that berserker, who has already mastered shapeshifting, by the way, because berserkers could shapeshift. So it would be a natural body to try to possess anyway. But if not, it doesn't matter anyway, because then he's travelling incognito, something that Odin would have valued indeed. So there is possession, okay? Possession is one thing that can be done also for travelling the lands. And maybe that's how they travel the lands, purely through possession, rather than actually spiritually moving in and trying to maintain a spiritual presence within a physical world without a physical body. Okay. Now, as I say, there are another subsection of godlike beings that may not be God, may or may not be gods. Okay, and that is the Tuatha De Danann, which most people will either call pixies, piskies, fairies, or the little people. Okay, these may in fact very well be the gods of the ancient Britannics, or the gods of the ancient Britannics were similar to them, because of course the ancient Britannics actually tended to be at war with the Tuatha De Danann, so it might be that they're just simply a sub-race of gods. They may even be the elves, who knows, of Alfheim. I mean, who knows what they are? I'm not trying to say that I know what they are, but what I'm trying to say is there is this race of godlike beings that are spiritual in nature, but exist fully and permanently within the physical realms upon choice. But upon choice can then go back to their mounds under the hills, for example, and disappear, i.e. go back to the spiritual realms, and they would travel to the spiritual realms and may even have a realm between the spirit and the physical, a place of existence where, you know, the equilibrium is all different to how it would otherwise be. Perhaps right in the middle. Perhaps they even live within the waters of life itself, or within Gununginap. Anyway, guys, I think I've said enough there. My throat's beginning to hurt a lot. I do have a chest infection at the moment, so this has been quite an endeavour on my part. But I've enjoyed it. I will do other talks like this. I hope I've not bored you too much. And I hope you've enjoyed it and learnt something. Put in the comments whatever you think and feel. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.